Hello, I'm Jeff Miracola, fantasy artist and illustrator, and I've got this brush and ink drawing that I did of a orc last year, and I want to do an acrylic painting of that. It's going to be a rather small painting. It's only 5 inches by 7 inches, and my drawing is a little too large for that, so I had to make a photocopy of that brush and ink drawing to get it down to the correct size that I needed. The surface that I'm working on is a product called gesso board, which is a pre-gessoed piece of masonite. I used that board itself to cut out the photocopy. When I place that board over the photocopy, I can see the ink drawing through the other side, so it helped me kind of center the image. And I use my usual transferring method, which is to use a Prismacolor black ebony pencil to coat the back of the photocopy. And then I tape that down to my painting surface. And I use a standard ballpoint pen to go back over all of the lines in my photocopy, so that I could transfer the drawing down to the surface. There's no need to press too hard either. Normal pressure on the pen will transfer the drawing just fine. And once that's transferred, I can take that off. I also save the photocopy just in case I need to start my painting over. So I'll just set that aside until I'm done with the painting. Now, if you've seen any of my other videos, you've seen that normally I start my paintings with a brown underpainting. This time, however, I am starting it with a green underpainting. Simply because this is an orc, and I'm thinking to myself, I kind of want this to be in the green or green-yellow range. There isn't really any need for me to start with a brown underpainting on this. Also, for the most part, I'm really just figuring my way through as I'm working on this. It's such a simple little painting that I didn't really plan it out. I didn't do any color studies or anything like that. I just jumped right in and started painting, and I'll figure out the colors along the way. For simple paintings like this, that's what I do. This isn't for a client. This painting was made for one of the backers of my Kickstarter that I did last year for my acrylic painting DVD. Some of you may know this and some of you may not, but in 2015, I created an acrylic painting techniques DVD. That DVD, which is also available as a digital download, is probably the most comprehensive look at my entire process of acrylic painting. From the very beginning idea stages, doing thumbnail drawings, all the way to the finished painting. And then there's a ton of extra stuff also on the DVD. There are more acrylic painting tips on there. I've got some information about how to build an art portfolio, the importance of figure drawing. I've got a studio visit, so you can see my working space. Lots of stuff like that, a lot of extras. So if you get the chance, check out that DVD. In the meantime, this gives you just a little peek at a very simple acrylic painting process. Using this sap green, I just create a tonal underpainting. At this point, I'm really just trying to figure out the lighting, some tonal qualities, different shapes and little imperfections in skin and things like that. I'm just finding my way through this. Again, like I said, not a whole lot of planning went into this other than that original drawing. I'm really just finding my way through this thing, and as I'm working on it, stuff does start to come to me and I know what I want to achieve. I already have a good sense of where my light source is going to be. I use that as my starting point. And since I really like textures a lot in my paintings, I'm keeping this nice and loose and a little bit messy, so I get lots of imperfections in the paint. At this point, I'm not using anything mixed in with my paints other than water. However, for the next layer of paint I'm going to put down, I do add slow dry blending medium to it. And what this stuff does is it really slows down the drying process of the paints. This allows the paint to be more blendable or to cover a larger area. But the real reason I use it is for its blendability and the fact that I can put down a layer of paint with this medium mixed in, and it remains wet so that when I work back into it with another color, I get some really nice blending effects and textural effects. With my sap green color still on my palette, I also add some raw umber and mix the slow dry medium into that paint as well. And I don't follow any kind of rule as far as like how much of the slow drying medium to add to the paints. I just do it by feel. I know that the paint gets to the right consistency that I need. And you can see as I'm brushing the paint on there, it's thin enough that I can still see that painting under there. I brush some paint on, but I don't brush the paint on the entire painting because although the slow dry medium is mixed in with the paint, it still does dry rather quickly. So now with a mixture of yellow ochre and white, I start working into that paint that I just laid down. And because that green and raw umber paint that I just laid down is still wet, the yellow ochre and white is going to start to mix with it in certain areas, and it starts to pick some of it up and move it around. It's this part of the painting that feels like sculpture to me. I feel like I'm molding it with clay because the paint's kind of moving around. That's how I've always thought of it as. It just feels very sculptural to me. And if you've seen any of my other videos, you know that the layering process is a very important part of my process. I do a lot of layering and glazing to achieve my color and the depth and that glow that the color has in my paintings. The colors that I'm working with here, this white and this yellow mixed with this very light green, I know that this is not the final colors of the painting. And that doesn't bother me because at this stage I'm just really sculpting out the forms. That's all I'm concerned with. And maybe nailing some of the values, knocking in some of the shadows like you see me doing here. And at this point, I'm still just working with those four colors, the sap green, raw umber, white, and yellow ochre. And it's a mess. It's all a big mess at this stage. You've heard me mention this before in videos, if you've seen any of them. It's that messy stage right here where you gotta punch through that wall. You gotta get past this stage because this can be the discouraging stage of your painting where it's just horrible looking. Doesn't seem like anything's going right, and none of the values are there. Maybe it's just too messy. Maybe the paint is moving around too much on the surface that you're painting on and you just don't like the way it's sliding around and you can't control it. And so the painting does just look like a big mess. Every painting starts that way. Just got to be patient and punch through. Keep working at it. And you can see here I'm just continuing to work the values to push those darks darker, so that the whites that I put down, the yellow ochre and the whites that I put down now start to pop a little bit more, because you've got those lighter areas next to darker areas. So there's more contrast in the painting. It just starts to look a little richer. And it helps to darken up the background as well. Look how messy that background is. You see all those brush strokes and all that stuff. Now, if you want to get it smooth, then of course you can do that. But I want this painting to be messy. You know, I want you to see all the brush strokes. All right, so here's that glazing process that I was talking about earlier. This is me taking a green gold, which is a pretty transparent paint on its own. Even if you didn't add any water to it, this color is pretty transparent. But maybe I watered it down a little bit and brushed it over the entire thing. So now what that does is it kind of homogenizes the whole painting. It brings everything together. All those values have a little bit of that green gold in it. And, you know, of course, it looks very monochromatic at that point. But it pulls everything together. It gives me a middle tone value to start to work up and down from again. Okay, so now I go back into it with some white paint to start putting highlights in and more details, a smaller brush, just doing a little bit more work here and there on bringing out the highlights. This is where it'll start to come together. It's at this stage where it's starting to look a little bit less messy, and I'm starting to feel like I have a little bit of direction to the painting. I kind of know where I'm headed color-wise and lighting-wise, so it's just a matter of going through the motions now and creating all those little interesting spaces and all those interesting brush strokes in the painting, fleshing out the figure that I'm working on and the lighting. This orc, when I did this drawing, was kind of like, made me think of that old Uncle Creepy in the old EC Creepy comics, if any of you know what that is. That's probably also the reason why I have this orc wearing a collared shirt and tie, which is not something you'd normally see an orc wearing, I guess, but, you know, just having fun with it. It's pretty fun too when you decide to work on a painting and you tell yourself ahead of time, you know what, I'm gonna make this painting loose and full of brush strokes and real messy. It can be a lot of fun to work on. It can be pretty liberating, actually, if you're constantly working on paintings where you're trying to be a lot more precise with your strokes and with your blends and all that. It's nice once in a while to just say, you know what, I'm gonna be a mess. I'm gonna be a kid again. Almost like finger painting, right? Don't worry about the brush strokes. Don't worry about that. It's got a lot of energy, and that's cool. Just go with it. Have fun. After the painting is dried, I do yet another glaze, and this time I'm glazing some more of that raw umber into the background and in various areas. And I start to work some of that brown umber into the face of the character as well. I'm only thinning this raw umber with water. I only used that slow dry medium during that one early stage, and I haven't used the slow dry medium again. It's all just water and paint from this point forward. So again, another glaze after that layer dried. I'm glazing it again with the green gold mixed with just a tiny bit of raw umber, just to dirty it up a little bit. And I get a lot of people asking me, like, why do I do this? Why do I paint it and then I glaze over it and cover what I just did, and then paint it and glaze over and cover? Well, each time I'm not covering it with opaque paint. I'm covering it with a very thin, watered down glaze of paint. But each time I'm doing that, it's creating even more depth in the painting. It's giving this really nice contrast and richness to the colors that I put down before. And each time I glaze it, it just has even more punch and even more power. And also, a part of painting is building up your surface, your painting surface, to where it gets to that real ideal painting surface, where maybe the paint is not sliding around so much anymore, and it feels a little bit better to paint on because it's already got maybe 3-4 layers of paint that you're painting on top of. It acts a little bit differently, the paint, when you put it down on a surface that already has multiple layers of paint. The paint grabs to the surface more, and so you can achieve different effects and different results that you couldn't achieve in your first 1 or 2 layers. So when I was working on this orc, I just, and it wasn't originally called a blood orc, it just was an orc. And I just felt like the painting was missing something. I felt like it needed something, an additional color. I just didn't like the very monochromatic feel to the painting. I just figured, maybe there should be some blood pouring down onto this orc's head. Why? I don't know. I just felt like red would be really stark to have in here, so I grabbed a cadmium red, medium hue, and thought, well, that would look really nice just set off against all these other colors, to have just one bright red color in the middle of this painting. So again, experimental, finding my way. If it didn't work out, I would just try to remove it and paint over it and do something else. But I decided to, let's see where this goes. So you can see here I'm, again, just water mixed with the red paint, but I originally thought that this blood would be pouring down from out of frame onto the orc's head. And then I just decided I didn't like that at all. I didn't like that red going all the way off the painting. Taking a paper towel and some water, I am just trying to remove as much of that red paint at the top of the painting as I can. So now I start thinking, well, maybe it was just, it's blood that's on the orc's head, and maybe it was put there, with somebody's hand, but maybe he had his hands and he dipped them in blood and he painted on his head with the blood, and so now the blood's dripping down. I don't know. I didn't give it a whole lot of thought. But I know I didn't like, at that point, I didn't like the red going all the way off the frame of the painting. Just stopped it right at the top of the orc's head. And just try to imagine, well, how would this blood be flowing down this orc's head? And so that's how he became a blood orc. now, I'm at that stage where I'm just going through and cleaning up some lines. I'm still keeping it real painterly, real loose, but I'm just cleaning up some edges and fleshing out some of the shapes and forms a little bit more, adding in a few little details here and there, wrinkles and crow's feet next to the eyes, things like that. Just all those little nicks and dings and fun little things I love in my paintings. I always like to put little stuff and noodle around with my paintings, and it's very relaxing to me, especially when I'm working on pieces like this, which, again, there's no pressure because it's not for a client. It doesn't have to satisfy anybody but me. Those are sometimes the best paintings. It's a good shot so you can see how small the painting is that I'm working on. Using a little bit of that yellow ochre mixed with the raw umber, I work onto the shadow side of the head. Again, just to add lots of those imperfections in skin and little wrinkles and pock marks and things like that on the skin. All that wonderful stuff that makes an orc, right? There's an orc. That's one scary orc. Much more scary than my painting. Alright, so cleaning up the top of that painting where I removed that red earlier. Just covering that up with some green gold mixed with white. A little more opaque so I can knock out some of that red that's up there. At the same time, start to create some like light rays or something like that that are coming down. Again, just interesting shapes and lines. For me, it's all about textures and shapes and interesting things in the painting, interesting brushstrokes and whatnot. So I'm thinking, well, there's got to be maybe some light coming down from above as well. Which kind of goes against the lighting that I set up, where it's coming from the left side of the orc's face. But this is fantasy. I can have multiple light sources if I want. I also like soft edges in my paintings. And that's what you see me doing here. I'm taking the white and green gold mixture and watering it down and just going along the edges of the hair to soften it up. The paint that I'm putting down will be a lot more transparent, so it just gives a nice softness to that edge. And I'm not a big fan of hard edges in my paintings. I mean, of course I do it when I have to, but I'm a sucker for soft edges. But see how that changes the feel of it a little bit when I do that transparent paint on the edges? Now it just kind of feels like more glowy, right? It's like that orc is just glowing a little bit more. Now, I told you I was trying to figure my way through this painting, right? I didn't really have a plan, and so I was just going with it. And here's one of those things I did where I was just kind of going with it. I thought, well, what else does it need? Maybe I give this orc these bright red eyeballs, these irises that are just red, and I'll give him red eyes. And then I looked at that and I was like, Jeff, what the heck are you doing? That looks now you've turned it into some serious, scary painting into something comical. And so it just looked terrible. So I went back over those eyes with some white paint, a few layers, took off that red and put some white back in there. So it's no pupils, looks scarier. Yeah, little moment of lapse in judgment there, but happens to the best of us. I also didn't like how clean that background was. As you know me, I got to dirty things up. So just taking some transparent paint, the green gold with white, tiniest bit of white, just to make it a little bit opaque. Really watered down and just let that drip down. And wherever those drips go, just let them go, right? Just make a mess of it. It's a controlled mess. So it's messy, but a controlled mess, right? So I take the raw umber mixed with the cadmium red so that I can create a darker red and just work in some shadow areas for that blood. Just so it feels a little bit more like the blood is moving along the surface of the orc's head. I've also worked in a few highlights with white on the blood so it's a little bit shiny. And then I bring back the brightest areas in my painting as well after I've done some of this layering work. Working back into it with white again. Mostly the left side of the head and the top. It's interesting to note too that I focused all my energy on the orc's head and the upper part of the head. I left that the collared shirt and the tie has remained the underpainting the entire time, and it will in the final painting. I like doing that, and that's probably one of those things I picked up from all my years of studying the work of Frank Frazetta. I really loved his ability to just work up the areas that were important in the paintings and to let certain areas just drop off into the underpainting. I always admired that about his work. There's a sense of control there, a sense of like controlling yourself from covering every square inch of the painting and working everything up. And although that can be a lot of fun sometimes to work up every square inch of the painting, there's also times when you want to do something like this and you want to let that underpainting show through. It's like letting some of the sketch show through, and it's really fun to look at paintings like that and see the beginnings of the painting as well as the final stages all in one painting. It's just a matter of, just some little detail work here and there. Again, cleaning up edges and maybe adjusting some colors. And because I wasn't satisfied, I had to add some like little lights or something in the background. So these are all the colors that I use in this painting. Sap green, raw umber, yellow ochre, white, green gold, and that cadmium red. So it's a pretty limited color palette, which is also a fun thing to do once in a while. To just limit the colors you're going to use to just a handful of colors. 4, 5, 6 colors, and that's it. It can be a challenge to do that. And there you go. There's the final painting. I think all told it took me hour and a half, 2 hours to do the painting. And it's nice and loose and gestural. It's got energy, limited color palette. I wasn't quite sure when I started that it was going to end up that way, but I'm happy with how it turned out. There you go. Just a little peek at one of my acrylic painting processes. Thanks again for watching. I appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, I would appreciate you doing so because I'm always uploading videos and I've got a ton of videos already on my channel. So go ahead and search that. You'll find lots of stuff for oil painting, acrylic painting, drawing, pen and ink drawing. Lots of stuff out there on my channel. So, as a reminder, please visit 3pointspublishing.com or amazon.com to purchase my Acrylic Painting Techniques DVD. It has over 6.5 hours of content on 4 DVDs for a very reasonable price. That video is also available as a digital download for those of you that don't want physical DVDs. And that digital download is available at 3pointspublishing.com as well. Thanks again for watching. Take care. Until next time, bye.